Hello, greetings, Aquaba. Welcome. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. We hope that you are reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength. We're so glad that you are here today to join us for this episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, Unknown Facts about Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. We are so glad that you are here. We do have to give a quick disclaimer. Just like last week, our power is completely out where I live. So just like last week, I'm sitting in my car attempting to broadcast. So if something happens, you'll know why. We're doing our best we can to continue to be consistent despite not having power here since last night and experiencing the same thing last week. But the upside is that a large percentage of the people in this world live with these kind of conditions. So it gives us a gentle reminder of why we struggle and fight the way we do, because no one should have to deal with daily conditions where they don't have the basic needs to function. So this is where we are, and this is why we do what we do, and we're glad that you're here. One thing about that, one last thing is that it's also a good lesson to keep yourself prepared. You cannot rely on the capitalist system. And I'm not one of those people who sees power outages as just like a freak of nature because of the weather. Yeah, the weather's been bad. But this has to do with the capitalist system and the lack of planning that takes place in the capitalist system. They don't plan for events like this. They just, when they happen, they're like, oh, what are we going to do now to fix it? That's capitalism. That's how the system works. Like, you have a city of 1 million people, you should be able to have a plan in place so that if there half 500,000 people lose power, how many telephone poles is that? How many people do you have on crew that can address those telephone poles? If it's 3,000 telephone poles, how would you facilitate making sure that happens? That's what, in a socialist society, how you would organize around something like this. But capitalism doesn't do that, because all those things cost money. So understand that you're on your own when these things happen in this society. And that's why, we have a lot of preparation to do, myself and my family, but and so we make sure we have, you might hear it in the background going. We make sure we have that. So that's why it's important to be prepared, you all. And on that note, we give thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, the real indigenous people, not those who are confused and don't want to identify with Africa because all you know about it is what our enemies have told us. So you make up fiction that you're indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. We're talking about the people, the American Indian people, the native people, the Chicanos, Mexicanos, Puerto Ricanos. Those are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we honor them always in their struggle to get these lands back because they belong to them. They can set up a system where 300,000 people don't lose power in one day. I'm sure they can do that. And we also give honor to our African ancestors, who are the reason why we're here. And, this program, like many of them we do, is structured specifically around addressing the contributions of our ancestors in the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and talking specifically about the things that they do that are not well known, that you probably have heard of, but you didn't know were connected to Garvey and the UNIA. So I think it'll be an interesting program today. We're going to try to get to it. And again, we apologize for any technical difficulties. We are resolute in our desire to ensure that we get this to you the best way we can. So Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. The AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan-African political party based in Africa. Our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa, one unified socialist Africa. That is our objective. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And there is no better example of that than the first party Congress that the All African People's Revolutionary Party is organizing, which takes place later this week in Guinea-Bissau, West Africa. I'm preparing to head there tomorrow, and we will have people coming from about a dozen countries all over the world to participate, primarily in Africa, to participate in this Congress in an effort to move our struggle forward to achieve Pan-Africanism. So we hope that you will support these efforts, support our efforts to have a successful party Congress. We'll talk about that throughout the hour. And Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by myself with Jamu Umi and Shakura Umi, my daughter, both of us active and organizing within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So to get us started on the unknown facts about Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, we'll start with Shakura.
Thank you so much, kind sir. Appreciate it very much. And you all, it's not too late to continue donating for our first party of Congress. As my dad said, they will be convening on the continent just later this week, but we still have our donation link at the top. We ask you to still consider donating. And once we shift for next week's seminar, I'm going to change the link so that we can, change the focus so that we can still ask for your donations. But we actually, as a organization, are going to start imploring people to support African Liberation Day, which you know is coming up in May. And so we'll be asking you all to help us donate for that event, which is a very large event. We have to pay for translators, we have to pay for travel, we have to pay for resources, technology, different things to be I can't even think of the word, not just translated, but for translators to come and be able to spend that kind of time, folks communicating on different levels. And so we are asking you to continue with the donations. Don't stop, because we have events all year long. We'll be asking folks for donations for the Pan-African Women's Day. We just have things all the time that we're trying to do, because this is an organization and we're trying to build endurance among one another so that we can stay focused on keeping our eye on the prize, which is helping Mother Africa to get respect and to get organization and to get control of the resources that she produces back, so that we can all have a better way of life. And so in doing that, that means that we need to have events such as African Liberation Day, Pan-African Women's Day, so that we can be reminded of why this work is so important. So speaking of that, one ancestor and scholar who was so critical in helping to remind us of why this work was so important was our comrade Marcus Garvey. And I'm always so excited to talk about him, because I loved reading Garvey and Garveyism. And again, like, this is why you all, this is so important, to increase your political education. And you have to do that with other like-minded people. I asked my dad, I think 4 years ago, because February will be year 3 that I've been in work study. So 4 years ago, I asked him, I said, can you just give me a list of all the work study material, the reading materials, and I can just start reading those books, because I want to know more. I'm tired of you being able to say quotes from people based on what you've read and things that you have learned. And I don't know how to say that stuff. I don't have access to that. I don't understand why Kwame Nkrumah was such a big, influential person for the African people everywhere. So I want to start reading as much as I can. And my dad said, yeah, that's fine if you can read, Shukura, but you need to have a space where you can discuss what you're reading with other people who have read the same thing. Because if you're just talking about it with people who haven't read, then all they can do is really receive it. They can't critique it, because that would be ignorant for them to do it, because they don't know what they're talking about, and they can't resist it. They have no way of knowing whether or not it's true or not, because they haven't exposed themselves to it. So if you're reading the same thing that somebody else is reading, you stand a better chance of comprehending it a little bit differently, because then you can talk to that person, get their perspective on how they took the information in. And more importantly, you all can grow together and figure out ways to apply the reading as it relates to fueling the masses of people, so that we can continue building this organizing front. And so in saying that, that was the last step for me. And I said, okay, I'm going to join work study. This is what I'm going to do. I can't be reading all these books and not having another person to talk to about. And Garvey and Garveyism was one of those books that I just thoroughly enjoyed. First of all, I enjoyed it because it was written by a non-male person. And so being able to understand Marcus's experiences and perspectives based on his partners perspective on how he was going about doing these things, as well as what other people of the Universal Negro Improvement Association were doing. That was really critical, not to mention understanding their personal lives and what was going on. I remember the first couple of chapters talk in great detail about how Marcus Garvey grew up was born in Jamaica and understood very quickly as he traveled around the world. He noted a common denominator among Africans everywhere. And this is one of my favorite parts of the book, where he says, we're seeing that Africans everywhere are impoverished. We're seeing that Africans everywhere are without stable income. We're seeing that they are food insecure. They have health chronic issues, as well as physical and mental issues. They don't have the support that they need. Their children don't have secure food or educational resources. There are at least 75% of Africans in the world are illiterate and don't have access to education to be able to change some of those conditions. He said it doesn't matter if they were born in Jamaica. It doesn't matter if they were born in the States. It doesn't matter if they were born on the continent. And mind you, he's gone to all these places. And he was saying the common denominator is that we are suffering everywhere. That is the common denominator. And so it would seem that in order to understand how to address those issues and how to fix those issues, we first would need to understand that we are not as different as we think we are, especially because we're all found in different parts of the world. We still have one common link, and that common link is Mother Africa. Right. And so Garvey understood that in order to help us be better involved in changing the conditions of ourselves everywhere, that meant that we needed to connect it back to Mother Africa. He also started to do more research, and he understood that there are so many people who don't know who they are. And that's why he pushed so hard for us to go back home as much as we could, because the best way for you to fully understand who you are is to go back to the roots. And literally, one of my favorite quotes by him is, a people without the knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. I mean, how perfect is that, right? He's literally saying, if people don't know what their past was, if they don't know their history or their origin, and of course their herstory or their theirstory, then how are they going to be able to have that foundation? Where's their base? Where's their base? And that's precisely what colonization is if you don't know who you are, then that means anyone can tell you whatever they want you to know about yourself. And if you are ignorant enough, then you will accept anything they give you and be able to believe that this is how you need to act. This is how you need to proceed, because you don't understand that there's another way, right? I mean, we can think of so many different examples of that, but this is why it's important not only to know who you are, but to know where you come from. And so Garvey understood that. And Garvey was very proud to help folks understand that. You know, he made it very clear that part of the issue that we're having is that we were not connected because we were so dispersed. So another improvement that I felt the UNIA helped to offer was they created this newspaper channel where they were able to broadcast and publish these newspaper with different articles in these newspapers and submit that around the world. And of course, they weren't elitist. They didn't just print it in one particular language about things that were happening in one part of the world or why they were happening in multiple parts of the world, but they published these articles in multiple languages, again, as a way to reach our people. I think at one point, the book talked about citing maybe 42 different languages, which is incredible, because that means that you need 42 different people to sit there and type it out and translate it, right? And so just incredible to be able to have that kind of ideology. But he understood that because of colonization, we were everywhere and we were all speaking different languages, but we all still needed to know what the common ground was. We all still needed to know that there were some solutions on the arise. And we all needed to know that there was somebody out there who understood that we were suffering and he was trying to do something about it. Other people with the UNIA were trying to do something about it. There were organizations that were fighting for Africans to have a better way of life and for Africa to have a better way of life. And that's what Garvey intended to do, which is one of the reasons why the UNIA was created. Okay, and so if we continue to think about the work that Garvey was doing, then we need to understand how monumentous this work actually was. I mean, you have to remember, this was in the early, I'll say late 18th century, early 19th century. And so you didn't have too many people talking about Africa, right? At that time, you also didn't have too many people who were saying that, they see the importance of going to Africa at that time. And so a lot of people, felt like he was insane. And he talked about that. Well, I should say Amy talked about that, because as I said, Amy wrote the book. But they talked about that. They talked about how people didn't take him seriously. They talked about how people didn't take the UNIA seriously. They also talked about how people thought that it was a joke. They never thought that they would get home. They never thought that this movement would have a way to help people have a better understanding of who they are. But it would be like anything that we do in this world. We want to understand where it starts, which means we have to start from the point of contact and go from there. And so he took a big risk, standing out and letting people know this is not the end all be all for us. The reason that we're in these conditions is because we don't control the resources that our continent provides. And once we start being able to control those resources a little bit better, people are going to treat us differently, because we descend from the continent that is providing them those same resources. If you descend from a continent that's providing oil and cacao and gold and jewels and diamonds and rubber and cobalt and coltan and all of these other resources that are very, very, very limited in supply and in great demand, people have no choice but to start respecting you. But that's only if you are in a position to control how those resources get disseminated, how they get sold, how they get exchanged, how they get bartered. That means you need to be in a place of power. Your people need to be in a place of power. And you can't do any of those things. You can't control those resources. You can't determine how they get used unless you have control of your land. And Garvey understood that, which is one of the reasons why he was trying to get us to go back home. Again, everything starts from the base. You're never going to know who you are until you have a chance to walk on African soil, because the experience is life-changing. It is life-changing. You'll never, ever, ever have the same experience, especially once you leave and come back. If you're visiting Africa for the first time, after you leave the continent, you're not going to want to leave. It's going to be a very different experience. And it's very important that we highlight that Garvey understood that, you all, because, we get kind of jaded. We get kind of desensitized, and we just understand that, this is learned helplessness. We just understand that this is the way of the world. This is not the way of the world. Imperialism is an evil system, yes. But there's also mechanisms that are set out to detangle and to take it down. And it's up to us to understand that organization is one of the best ways that we can foster that. But we can't join an organization working for justice unless we understand that we need to have a better understanding of who we are. And again, we can thank Garvey for that. The sacrifices that he made, the risks that he took, the courage and the bravery that he faced. Again, not many people would have taken the stand that he took, and he risked being so unpopular. But it's not about that. It's about committing to your principles. It's about understanding that it's not about being popular. It's about speaking the truth, because humanity deserves the truth. We all deserve the truth. None of us deserve the lies that we have been fed. That's partly why we're so confused, because now we don't know what is true and what's a lie. And I think that was Kwame who said that. You think that you're believing the truth, but there's been so many lies that have been fed to you. The lies just start to all garble up like a trash bag at some point. So, I think that we need to acknowledge how everything that the Universal Negro Improvement Association did was bound to set us on a different path, where we could be proud to understand that Pan-Africanism in the late 18th century and the early 19th century was nothing to be ashamed of. Again, Garvey was helping to connect the dots and helping us to see that Africans in Canada, Africans in South America, Africans in parts of Haiti and parts of Barbados and other parts, Africans in New York, Africans in Sacramento, Memphis, we are all struggling. Africans in Montego Bay, Jamaica, Africans in parts of Europe, we are struggling. And the common denominator is we are all struggling, which is why we need to organize together, hence the term Pan-Africanism. And so I'm going to turn it back over to my dad. But again, we are still accepting donations for the first Party of Congress that is taking place next week. And please make sure you continue to donate, because next week I will be asking you all to consider donating to the All African Revolutionary Parties African Liberation Day. And so with that, I pass it over to my dad. And again, we are 8 days into the new year. It's not too late for you to join an organization that is working for justice.
Ashe, thank you very much, Shakura. I just want to clarify one thing. So the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, of course, was born in the Caribbean. He came here to the U.S. in 1915, 16, and started the Universal Negro Improvement Association. He spent time in Europe. He spent a lot of time in Central America organizing the UNIA, but he actually never set foot on the African continent. Marcus Garvey never went to Africa. And I just want to start off my section by pointing that out, because as I prepare to head home to Africa tomorrow for the upteenth time, I am humbled by the fact that this man, who is largely the reason why I even see the necessity to go to Africa, never got a chance to go home to Africa. And that should be significant to you, because hopefully it helps you see that you don't have to, it's about what your values are and what you do to bring those values into existence. It's not about, it doesn't matter that he never went to Africa. Most of you didn't even know that before I just said it, that he had never been there. You just assumed because he was such a person who stood for the rights of and the redemption of the African continent that he had been there. And that's the point I want to make with what I'm saying right now, is that it's not, we have to get beyond just looking at, okay, this person is from somewhere, so they must be about that. No, it's about what we do moving forward. It's about what we do every day. And so Marcus Garvey was about that. And that's why he was able to make the contribution that he made. And then, as Shakur said, a lot of us, again, we talk a great talk. We have great things to say all the time. We know how to say the right things. And, just we talk frankly here on this program. A lot of times we do that because we want to look good. We have self-esteem issues. Our parents didn't raise us properly, whatever the case may be. It's valid. Not trying to take anything away from that, but none of those things are going to get us free. The only thing that's going to get us free is when we build up a people who do as they say and say what they mean and mean what they say. That's what we have. That's what we're struggling to create among the masses of people. So that means when we talk about this work that we're engaged in, like this party Congress, you got to see it as your responsibility to support that in every way possible. Support it ideologically, philosophically, financially, every way possible. This is not something that we are doing for ourselves. And I can tell you right now, myself, this is not an opportune time for me to leave and go home to, as much as I love Africa, this is not a good time with what's going on in my personal life for me to take this trip. But this is important for the masses of our people. So yeah, I'm coming out of my pocket for a lot of money, and I'm going for this time to engage in this meeting. I'm not a tourist. I'm not going around seeing the tourist spots and doing that. I don't do that when I travel. I'm going to do work like I always do. So you can't, if you understand that, and there's no evidence to suggest otherwise, not only for me, but everybody else in the AAPRP. So if you understand that, you can't say, well, they're just doing that for themselves. Then you're a fool if you say that. You're negating reality. Our history is wrought, is loaded with examples of us making contributions to our people's struggle. And this is no different. So when we say, please donate to our party Congress, you're not doing anything for me or Shakur. from that. Possible for this struggle. That has to be said. We will never compromise on that, no matter how much it offends people. If people get offended here and that, then damn it, we're doing our damn job, and we will continue to do that. So let's get into unknown facts about the Garvey movement. So, this has been often stated, but I think it's always important to say that the UNIA had as many between 2 million and 6 million members in its heyday in the early 1920s. And they had chapters in 40 countries. They had chapters in various colonialized areas in Africa. They had chapters in Europe. They had chapters all throughout North America. They had chapters in Mexico, in Guatemala, in El Salvador. Y'all didn't even know there were African people in those countries. Yes, there are. The slave master was thorough. He kidnapped us and took us everywhere. As Shakur mentioned, they had chapters in Haiti. They had chapters in South America. They had chapters all over the world. Wherever African people had a footprint, they had the UNIA active in those areas. This was 100 years ago. And they did this. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have WhatsApp. They didn't have email. They didn't have any of that. All they had was the ability to write letters. They didn't even have a telephone. And they organized 40 chapters in the UNIA 100 years ago. And here today, some of us got all the technology under our roof and can't even organize a barbecue, can't even get 10 people to come to a barbecue at our place. And we got all the means to reach people all over the world and can't even get 5 people to come and do a ceremony honoring our people's struggle. So this tells you the commitment that these Africans in the UNIA had 100 years ago to achieve that level of organization. You can say what you want about it, but anybody that can organize an African organization in 40 countries, I'm studying them. I'm trying to understand what they did so that we can take what they did and advance it and make it better to move us forward. And then the Negro World, the UNIA's publication, as Shakur mentioned, yes, it was published in a number of languages, but it was primarily published, every issue was published in English, Spanish, and French in its entirety. In 33 countries, they did that. And they did that without any kind of automated press, no internet again, none of that. They were able to do that. And here today, we can't even get a flyer printed in a city or a town or anything. We struggle to get 5 copies of one flyer out. And they were able to do this, you all, 100 years ago. They were able to make these things happen. I mean, this is phenomenal. And of course, Garvey is the architect of the red, black, and green flag. But what most people don't know is that the Black Star, of which the UNIA named its shipping line after, was called the Black Star because there was a large shipping company at that time in the U.S. called the White Star Line. And the White Star Line's featured ship was the Titanic. See, a lot of us, these slave masters driven us insane. The Titanic was such a good movie. Well, you didn't see no Africans in that movie. And the reason why is because the White Star Line was a segregated shipping line. We were not allowed on the ship. So you could watch the movie and enjoy Leonardo DiCaprio and whoever else was in it. I never saw the movie for that reason. But you can look at the movie and enjoy it. But just understand the history that we're talking about. That we couldn't have gotten on that ship, whether we had the money or not, was irrelevant. It was a segregated shipping line. And what Marcus Garvey and the UNIA wanted to do was build an African shipping line. So that's why they called it the Black Star Line. And if you look at many of the flags in Africa today, they have a black star in there. We can't be confused and think that the Black Star was created by Mos Def and Talib Kweli. The Black Star came from Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the UNIA. And Kwame Nkrumah proliferated it by putting the Black Star in the flag of Ghana, and many other countries, since Ghana was the first one to become independent, replicated that action. But this is a wonderful thing that speaks to the Pan-African character of the Garvey movement. And we just really think it's important to reiterate that Next slide, please, Shakur. And so, most people, yes, thank you. Most people don't know that the counterintelligence program of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, most people understand the role they played in destabilizing the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Revolutionary Action Movement, the Socialist Workers Party, the Nation of Islam, and of course, the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement. They very much so did everything in their resource and power to sabotage the work of those organizations. But J. Edgar Hoover, that devil pictured in on your screen there, was the director of the FBI for 54 years. And he started as director in 1919. He was 24 years old. And his first major case was to take down the Garvey movement. And the reason why that was his first case, and that was a priority, because if you look at the sign on the left, this is a sign in Liberia of Firestone Rubber. And Firestone Rubber has had a contract to control rubber production in Liberia to make tires, and Firestone controls much of the tire production all throughout Africa. And Firestone has been a critical entity in sabotaging our people's forward movements in Africa for 100 years. They've had a contract in Liberia it's a 100-year contract. It expires next year. It was signed originally in 1924. And this was the work of J. Edgar Hoover. They devised a plot to sabotage the Garvey movement and intimidate the Liberian government at that time from negotiating with Garvey, because Garvey and the UNIA were in the process of organizing engineers to go to Liberia and develop the rubber production so that that production could be used to advance Africa and African people everywhere. And, of course, the capitalist U.S. couldn't have that, and the capitalist corporation Firestone couldn't have that. So they utilized the Department of Justice at that time, which later became the FBI, and J. Edgar Hoover to sabotage Marcus Garvey. And this, of course, led to the false mail fraud charges that got Garvey arrested, convicted, and incarcerated and deported to England, where he died, unfortunately, in 1940. But the point here is Firestone has engaged in this sabotage work for centuries, a century now in Africa. They control rubber production in Liberia, like I said, and Liberia produces most of the rubber, more rubber than any country on the planet Earth. And they control that and use that for all of the tire production, not only for Firestone, but they sell rights to other tire producing companies. When Ghana was a socialist country under Kwame Nkrumah in the 1960s, when the Central Intelligence Agency, working in concert with the FBI, as they always do, illegally overthrew Nkrumah's government, Firestone took over the socialist Ghanaian government's tire producing factory in Takoradi, Ghana, where I've actually been to, and they sold it to Firestone immediately. The coup to overthrow Nkrumah happened on February 24th, 1966. Within days, the tire company was sold to Firestone, and they didn't buy the tire company there in Ghana, Takoradi, Ghana, so that they could produce tires. They closed it immediately because the socialist tire company was producing 100,000 tires, which in 1966, that was a lot of tires. They were producing that, and they were making a better quality tire at a lower price, because that's what socialism does, because you're paying people more, you're taking care of people. And we already know, y'all already know, when you have a job and you feel like you're respected at that job, you're going to do better work. That's just a fact. We all know that. When you feel like you're being disrespected and exploited at your job, you're going to do everything you can to do as little as possible. And that's why the tire company in Ghana was so effective. And so Firestone wanted to sabotage it, because they want the capitalist model, the profit model, money over people model. And so they've been doing that in Africa for, as I said, close to a century. And they were a significant element in sabotaging the Garvey movement back in the 1920s. And then that's another thing, is that we can say the whole thing about so many different resources beyond rubber. We can say it about coltan, which is the rare earth mineral that allows us to communicate the way we're doing right now, that comes primarily out of the Congo. We can say it about the Niger Delta oil in Nigeria. We can say it about the diamonds and gold that come from Central and Southern Africa. We can say it about any number of resources that are exploited by these multinational corporations, the car manufacturing companies, whoever they are. We can say it about any number of them, so that their interests and their priority is to make sure that those resources remain in control of the capitalist corporations and are not in our control, and that they are able to continue to exploit them for their continued profit. Next slide, please. So, let's talk about some other facts that people don't necessarily know about the Garvey movement. And, this is with all due respect to people who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. We don't, in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we don't set trip, we don't gang bang. When I was a young man growing up in the inner city in San Francisco, a lot of the people today that criticize the Nation of Islam, and I get it. I don't agree with. It'd be difficult for me to find 5% of what Farrakhan is talking about that I personally agree with. But at the same time, I can disagree with someone and respect their contribution. Most people can't do that. If they don't agree with someone, or they don't think someone is good for whatever reason, then they have to dismiss the whole thing, throw the baby out with the bathwater. But this is a dialectical world that we live in, which means there's positive and negative in everything. And whether people like it or not, the Nation of Islam has done some incredible work in African communities throughout the U.S. for almost 90 years now, including the neighborhood I grew up in. A lot of these people who are criticizing the Fruit of Islam, the soldiers for the FOI, the soldiers for the Nation of Islam today, would not even have ventured into the neighborhood I grew up in when I was growing up there. But yet here they were talking to young men like me when nobody else was. All these people criticizing them today weren't there talking to young men like me. They aren't there talking to young men like me now, or young women, or young they, or whoever. They ain't talking to nobody. They just criticize. So my point is that I would not be here if it were not for those soldiers in the Nation of Islam talking to me when I was a young man. I don't agree with them. Otherwise, I'd be in the Nation of Islam. But my point is that I'm not criticizing them, because we respect organization. And I'll take a bad organization. I'm not saying they're a bad organization, but I'm saying I will take a bad organization over any individual that's not in any organization any day of the week. Any day of the week. So I say that to say that the narrative coming from the Nation of Islam for a number of years has been that El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, Malcolm X, was the complete product of Elijah Muhammad. They say that all the time. Like, there would be no Malcolm X if it were not for Elijah Muhammad. And my point right now is that although I respect, where they're coming from, he was in prison, Malcolm was, and they did go to the prison and his brothers that were in the nation and recruit him out. And they did, help him become involved in organizing life. But that's undialectical to say that one individual is totally responsible for the development of any other individual. There are many variables that contribute to the development of human beings. And so we're just struggling, having a principled struggle with that position that, well, Elijah Muhammad is totally responsible for whatever you believe Malcolm X became, because that's not historically accurate. Malcolm X's parents, Louise Little, who you see on the screen there, and Earl Little, were active members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA, the organization of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. They were both members. Now, most people have heard that Earl Little was a member, and even Spike Lee's terrible movie about Malcolm X demonstrated that to some degree. But very few people are aware that Louise Little Malcolm's mother, who was born in Grenada, was also an active member in the Black Cross Nurses organization, which was an organization of the UNIA. It was an active leader in the UNIA in the towns that they lived in when they were raising the little children. So if you understand that, you know that the concept of African nationalism was somewhere in Malcolm's consciousness before he went to prison, before he was doing all the crazy stuff he was doing in Boston and Harlem, before he joined the Nation of Islam. The seeds for African nationalism were in him because his parents would have instilled that in him. Even if they didn't talk to him about it, he would have seen it through the work that they were doing and had some exposure to it. So it's not accurate to say that, well, everything Malcolm became, he became because of Elijah Muhammad. Certainly that was a major influence, but Malcolm was influenced by the UNIA. And we know that from some of the actions Malcolm took even before he joined the Nation of Islam. The way that he defied being drafted to go serve in the U.S. military in World War II. I'm not going to tell you what he did. You need to study it if you don't know. But that was the act of a person who understood this war is not for me. And he was not in the Nation of Islam yet. He was still out in the streets doing crazy stuff and committing crimes, but he had that understanding. And so that came from his experiences growing up before he even knew there was an Elijah Muhammad. So that's important to point out, because my point is that Elijah Muhammad was a lieutenant in the UNIA. The Noble Drew Ali, who founded the Moorish Science Temple, was a member of the UNIA. Earl Little, Louise Little were members of the UNIA. The UNIA's expansion over the consciousness and the actions of our people has never been seriously examined the way it needs to. They have had a tremendous impact on our people all over the world, and that needs to be understood and respected. And also, Nguyen Ao Thach, who is in the picture below, you would know him as Ho Chi Minh. He was the leader of the Vietnamese resistance against U.S. imperialism, the war against Vietnam, as they call it in this backward country. Nguyen Ao Thach was a student at Columbia University. He lived in Harlem, New York in the early 20s. He had a job at a soul food restaurant washing dishes. So this Vietnamese man had daily exposure to African people. And because of that, he used to go out on the street corners in Harlem and listen to Marcus Garvey speak when Marcus Garvey was out there. And that's how he got a clear understanding of the racist nature of U.S. capitalism in this country. So most of you have seen the movie Dead Presidents. Came out in the 90s. It was with Lorenz Tate, Chris Tucker, Keith David. All of them were in that movie. And it's a movie about Lorenz Tate, and Chris Tucker grow up on the East Coast, and they go to Vietnam. They get drafted and they go to Vietnam, and they come back and they can't, get anything going in terms of jobs or whatever, so they rob a bank. But when they're in the course of that movie, I think that movie was the Huddleston brothers did it, I think so. But in the course of that movie, when they're in Vietnam, they show Bokeem Woodbine is in the movie too. They show him, he picks up a flyer off the ground in Vietnam, and the flyer says, "Black man, go home, this is not your war." And then his European sergeant tells him, get rid of that communist propaganda. Well, you have to understand that actually happened. The Vietnamese dropped hundreds of thousands of those leaflets during the Vietnam War. Black man, go home. This is not your war. They understood the contradictions because Nguyen Ao Thach, or better known as Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese Front, the Vietnamese Communist Party, they educated their people about the conditions of racism against our people, and they knew that they had solidarity with us and what we were experiencing in our fight. They understood the fight we were engaging in against this backward government during the 1960s, and they wanted our brothers who were at war in their country to know, you are not our enemy. You should not be here. And a lot of Africans were heavily inspired by the actions of the Vietnamese, because what they would do, because they were much smarter than the U.S. military, so what they would do, the U.S. military would, when they come upon people that they thought were Vietnamese resistance fighters, they call them by the reactionary name Viet Cong. There's no such thing as Viet Cong, so get that out of your lexicon if it's there. But what they would do is, they would slaughter everybody, like the My Lai slaughter that happened, where they put all the women, children, people in a ditch and slaughtered hundreds of them. That's what they would do over there, because this country is a terrorist country, and the U.S. military is a terrorist instrument of a terrorist country. So that's what they would do. But what the Vietnamese would do is, when they captured African or indigenous troops, they would politically educate them and let them go. And there are a number of Africans who were in the war in Vietnam who have given testimony to that. There are a number of them who got in trouble with the military for giving testimony about, y'all got to know the history here. Instead of we support our troops, shut up with that idiotic nonsense and understand what really happened in this country. There's an African, I can't remember his name, he wrote a book called Blood that detailed everything I just got through telling you in his own words and talked about it. So study that history, because it'll do a couple of things. It'll help us reaffirm that the U.S. military is a terrorist organization, and the Vietnamese people were fighting for their just rights and their struggle. And it also will, again, help us remember that when Al Thak, or Ho Chi Minh, was a student of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. He said that many times. If you read his writings, I have, he said that. And he educated his people about our struggle in this country. So stop regurgitating this nonsense, like when there was all the white supremacist acts against Asian people, and a lot of you out here, well, Asians never did nothing for it. They were doing stuff to show solidarity with our people before you were born. You just don't know it because you don't study anything. So, as Kwame Ture used to say, when we're sick, we take an aspirin. So why not, when we're stupid, don't we read a book? And I'm saying that is absolutely correct, 100% correct. So when Al Thak was, yes, I'll say it again, a student of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and organized a part of his resistance movement, based on the inspiration he received living in Harlem, listening in person to Marcus Mosiah Garvey speak, and understanding the contradictions of U.S. capitalism and its white supremacy against the African masses in this country. And as I mentioned, Kwame Nkrumah was so inspired by Marcus Garvey. He said Marcus Garvey was the biggest inspiration he had in his life, that he modeled much of what he did in Ghana. And if you go to Ghana, I've been there multiple times. They have their main arena for events in downtown Accra, the capital city, is the Black Star area. And that was his honor to Marcus Mosiah Garvey and Amy Ashworth Garvey and Amy Jock Garvey. And so this is the legacy. As you see the Ghanaian flag in the picture there, as I mentioned, the Black Star is there. And what, Kwame Nkrumah, what they added to it, and with thanks from the Rastafarian community and other conscious Africans, they added the other color to the red, black, and green, the gold. And so that's why we say, as Steel Pulse says in their song, Rally Around the Flag, rally around the red, gold, black, and green. And as we teach the children when we have educational sessions, the red is for the blood of the people that flows like a river. Black is for the people beautiful. Yellow is for the gold that they stole, right? And green is for the land, Africa. That's what that means. That was the slogan that was chanted in the UNIA in the 1920s. They didn't say green was for the land, Cincinnati, Ohio, or Memphis, Tennessee, or Los Angeles, California. We are so confused. They understood 100 years ago that we are African people. And it doesn't matter if we stay here another 500 years, we'll still be African people that have been here another 500 years. That's it. And so these are just some important logistical and not logistical, but some important logic of the UNIA and what their contribution has been to our people and our struggle. And so the last thing, and Shakur, please go to the last slide, if you would, please. The last thing we'll say before we close out is that I think the most important thing that you should be able to glean from the work of the UNIA is that you can't say in 2023 that, well, we can't get our people together. They got 6 million of us together with no internet, no resources, nothing but the ability to write and mail letters through snail mail. They got 6 million of us together. So that squashes your cowardly argument that we can't get together as a people. We proved that. We did it 100 years ago. There's no reason why we can't do it today. We got much better resources today to do it than they had 100 years ago. That's number one. Number two, it should help us understand clearly that our struggle is an international struggle. The UNIA had these chapters all over the world. They had them in the African English speaking communities. They had them in the African Spanish speaking communities. They had them in the African French speaking communities, in the African Portuguese speaking communities. And these communities were organizing around the principles of the UNIA, which were Africans for the Africans at home and abroad. Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. This was 100 years ago, you all. So we sound like idiots today in 2023 talking about, well, we can't do that. We would have done it, but it was just too many of us thinking like we think today. When they came after the Garvey movement in the 20s, well, they're fraud. They stole money through the mail. Oh yeah, they did. I believe they did because I sent in 5 cents and I don't know what happened to it. So they must be stealing money. There's too many of us that thought like that then, and too many of us today. But that's not going to stop us from moving forward. We're going to continue to build the consciousness. So we're talking. I know everybody here wants to build consciousness, or you wouldn't be here doing this. So we encourage you to hopefully be inspired by the example of the UNIA and to place it in a position in your consciousness where you can feel like, yeah, this is definitely an example of what we can and what we must do and what role I'm going to play to facilitate and ensure that this happens. Because we've talked about, Shakur mentioned the political education. You are not going to learn about the role of Firestone by watching CBS, NBC, or Fox, or MSNBC, or all of the BBC, or CIA, or none of that nonsense. You have to commit yourself to engage in a process where you can begin to say, okay, I'm going to find out the truth about these things. Because the truth is here. It's objective. You can't eliminate objectivity. It's going to exist. We just have to find it. That's what we have to do. So we encourage you to hopefully take that from this session. Like, there's so much that we can do and that we have to do, and we can and we will do if we come together to do it. And so make sure that you join us next week. And I have to say, for the next couple of weekends, please support Shakura. She will be heading up the program without me, Our Ancestors' Voices, the next 2 weeks, because I'll be at home in Africa, and it's 8-9 hours ahead, so I'm not going to be up at 2 to do the program because we have a full schedule of work for our party Congress. So please support Shakura for the next couple of weeks and continue to join us next week on January 15th, which is the actual born day of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we're going to talk about the legacy of Dr. King, and we're talking about the radical history of Dr. King. We're not talking about the soundbite King that you're going to hear on the radio all weekend or on TV, where I have a dream. Well, all God's children, black kids and white kids can join in the no words of Negro. That's all you know about Dr. King, because all you know is what your enemies have provided you. So we're going to go deeper than that. So tune in so we can know more than just what they tell us. That's one of the worst speeches. That was great. The I Have a Dream speech was a great speech. Every speech Dr. King gave was a great speech, but it was one of his worst speeches. So we want to talk about some of his other more consequential work, like why oppose the war in Vietnam, to Americas, those types of analysis that he gave. So we're here next week to talk about that. So come join us next time, same place. A fundraising for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And you can get, I'm in the picture there posing, you can get hoodies with conscious messages. It says African period, making the point that we are African people. We are not Americans. We're not any of these other things. We're African place. So if you go to prison and you're in prison, do you now say, well, I'm in prison for 30 years, so I'm a Afro prison? That's absurd to say that. But yet we've been incarcerated in this backward society for 500 years. I'm African American. I'm Black British. I'm African Canadian. I'm Afro Cuban. I'm Jamaican. Kwame Ture there's a video, you should look at it. And there's a debate about what we call ourselves. And he was on, this was back in the 80s. And he was on there with some Negro businessman. And the Negro businessman, Kwame was saying, well, we're African. The Negro businessman was saying, well, I'm not African. My family's from Jamaica. And Kwame was like, it was on PBS. And Kwame was like, what do you think you got to Jamaica? The white man dropped in Jamaica. I mean, we just have to get a higher level of understanding about who we are. We're in the Western Hemisphere because of colonialism and slavery, period. I don't care whether you were born in Africa or not. You're in the Western Hemisphere because of colonialism and slavery, period. That's it. All of us are. And so that's our legacy. That's who we have to fight. And so we have to say things like African, period. I'm not an African American. So, some of us don't have the courage to wear that kind of material. I understand that. So you can support our struggle and the work that we're doing. So we really, some of us are, we're good, we're all talk, but we need to be more than just talk. And to the link there for the APRP workshop and become a customer of the African Revolution. So then click aprp-intl.org. It's not the easiest process. I fully acknowledge that. We're working on that. But we ask you to make a contribution. Please do. I checked and there have been some small contributions, but we haven't gotten anywhere near what we should get. And so you still have time. We don't start our meeting for a couple of days. We still have to pay to get people on the continent to Guinea-Bissau. So I'm not asking you to contribute for me. I've got my ticket. I've even contributed on top of my ticket so that we could lay these expenses, but we need your assistance. This is your responsibility. I'm just telling you outright, it's your responsibility. It's not just mine, it's your responsibility. I support our people. I don't even like capitalism, but I support African businesses that are providing positive things for our people, and then that's how they feed their families. I don't even support that nonsense, but I support that because I support our people. So that's how you got to look at this. So please make a contribution. Please do that and go to abetterworld.me. All of these videos are there. I don't know when I can get this one up because, as I said in the beginning, last week I was out without power. We have these massive storms here, so I was without power Saturday night through Monday morning, and the same thing happened last night. Power went out; it hasn't come back on. So we need help, your help and your support, and your patience, because we'll get the video up as soon as we can. And since I'm going home, I don't know when that'll be, but as soon as I can, I will. And hoodcommunist.org, please support that site. It's a wonderful site. I look forward to returning to editor work there with them very shortly. Support the Thomas Sankara Center for Pan-African Unity. That's one of our on-the-ground projects in Burkina Faso, West Africa. And a QR code is on the screen there. And we have all of our AAPRP programs that are listed there. We strongly encourage you to support them. They're excellent programs. And of course, my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Please buy it. Please share it. It's only 8 lousy George slave-holding Washington dollars. That's it. And so we need it because we're using that book to organize our people. We will use the enemy's system to organize against the enemy, and that's what we do. So we ask you to support it, buy it, tell people about it so that we can begin to organize on a broad scale. We appreciate everybody. We love you all. We hope you are well, hope you are able to survive and prosper to your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health. Be well this Sunday. Be back here next week. Go to all the APRP programs. Make your donation. Make your contribution. A better life is available to us the moment we decide to claim it and bring it into existence. Forward ever, and have a great rest of your Sunday evening.